What they said I did, I know for a fact it wasn't true. I didn't headlock her. I didn't beat her with the door. I only try to diffuse the situation. They keep deflecting away from that. And what I did what they saying I did made it sound harsh, and I didn't do that. So we need justice. We need justice to be served too, the truth. And they keep deflecting from it.
It didn't start with shouting. It started with a question. When Holly finally asked for protection, it wasn't dramatic or loud. It was quiet, almost careful, like she already knew the weight of what she was about to say. Those close to her later described it as a turning point, the moment things stopped being manageable and started becoming serious. And then there was Carlos. Because instead of staying, he left. Not slowly, not reluctantly, he ran. That single reaction raised more questions than answers. For Romeca Meeks, who had been following the situation closely, that moment stood out above everything else. People don't usually run from conversations, especially ones that matter, unless there's something deeper beneath the surface. Holly's request wasn't random. It came after growing tension, subtle signs that something wasn't right. Friends had noticed changes, her tone, her energy, the way she hesitated before speaking. It wasn't fear exactly, but it wasn't comfort either. And when she finally spoke up, asking for protection, it suggested one thing clearly. She believed she needed it. But Carlos's reaction didn't match someone confused or caught off guard. It looked like avoidance. Calculated. Immediate. And that's what caught Romeca's attention the most. Because in situations like this, reactions often reveal more than words ever could. So the question became unavoidable. What was Carlos trying to get away from? The request for protection was one side of the story. His response was the other. And somewhere between the two was the truth. Backhand index pointing right. Stay tuned as the story unfolds. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for the next chapter. After that moment, everything began to look different. What once seemed like small, forgettable details now carried weight. For those following closely, especially Romeca Meeks, patterns started to emerge and they were hard to ignore. Holly hadn't just suddenly asked for protection. There had been signs. Subtle at first. Friends recalled moments where she seemed distracted, conversations where she held back, and times when she avoided going into detail about what was happening behind closed doors. Nothing that immediately raised alarm, but enough to suggest something wasn't right. Looking back, those moments felt louder. More important. There were also reports of tension between her and Carlos. Not explosive arguments, but a steady buildup, disagreements that didn't fully resolve, conversations that ended abruptly. It created an environment where things were unsettled, even if it wasn't obvious to everyone. And then there was communication. According to those familiar with the situation, messages between them had changed. The tone was different, shorter, more guarded. What once felt open and normal now felt distant. That shift doesn't happen without a reason. For Romeca, this wasn't just about one reaction anymore. It was about a timeline, a progression of events that led to Holly's decision to ask for protection. Because people don't make that kind of request lightly. It usually comes after something builds over time. And when Carlos ran instead of responding, it added another layer to everything that came before. His reaction didn't exist on its own. It connected to the tension, the distance, and the signs that had been overlooked. Now, the focus wasn't just on what happened in that moment. It was on what led up to it. By now, the focus had shifted. It wasn't just about Holly's request anymore. It was about Carlos's reaction to it. Because running isn't neutral. It's a choice. For Romeca Meeks, that choice raised the most important questions in the entire situation. Not assumptions, questions. The kind that come from trying to understand behavior that doesn't quite add up. Why leave at that exact moment? Why not stay and respond? Why avoid a conversation that clearly mattered? Those questions didn't come from speculation. They came from the timing. The fact that his reaction happened immediately after Holly asked for protection made it impossible to ignore the connection between the two. And that's where things became more complicated. People close to the situation began revisiting past interactions with Carlos. Some described him as calm and controlled. Others mentioned moments where he became distant or withdrawn under pressure. Nothing definitive, but enough to suggest that his reaction wasn't completely out of character. Still, there was no clear explanation from him. No public statement. No attempt to clarify why he left the way he did. And silence in moments like this often creates more uncertainty than answers. For Romeca, the situation wasn't about jumping to conclusions. It was about understanding the gap between what was said and what was done. Holly asked for protection. Carlos left. That sequence alone created a narrative that couldn't be ignored. Because when actions don't match expectations, people start looking deeper. And sometimes, what they find isn't in what someone says. It's in what they avoid. As time passed, one thing became more noticeable than anything else. Carlos still hadn't spoken. No explanation. No response. Nothing to address the moment that had drawn so much attention. And that silence started to carry weight. For Romeca Meeks, this was the phase where cases often shift, not because of new evidence but because of what isn't being said. In situations filled with questions, people naturally look for clarity. When it doesn't come, the focus turns inward. Toward behavior. Toward patterns. Toward what can be observed. Holly, on the other hand, remained consistent. Her request for protection hadn't changed. If anything, it now seemed more serious in light of everything that followed. She wasn't revising her stance or stepping back from what she said. That consistency mattered. Because when one side remains steady and the other remains silent, the contrast becomes impossible to ignore. Romeca also noted something else, how quickly the situation had escalated from private tension to public concern. Moments like that don't usually happen without a buildup, and they rarely resolve without answers. But answers require engagement. And Carlos wasn't engaging. That absence left a gap filled by speculation, questions, and a growing sense that something important was being withheld, not necessarily hidden, but not explained either. And in cases like this, silence doesn't stop the story. It becomes part of it. Because when someone chooses not to speak, people start listening more closely to everything else. By the end of it all, there was still no clear statement from Carlos. And that, more than anything, became the center of the story. For Romeca Meeks, the situation had moved beyond a single moment. It was no longer just about Holly asking for protection or Carlos walking away. It was about everything those actions represented when placed side by side. One spoke, the other didn't. And that contrast shaped how people understood the situation. Holly's decision to ask for protection remained unchanged. It stood as a clear indication that, at that moment, she felt the need for safety. Whether others fully understood her reasons or not, the action itself carried weight. Carlos's response, or lack of one, left a different kind of impact. Because without explanation, actions are left open to interpretation. And interpretation fills silence quickly. For some, his decision to leave suggested avoidance. For others, it raised questions about pressure, fear, or something else entirely. But without direct answers, those perspectives remain just that, perspectives. What made this situation stand out wasn't just what happened. It was what didn't happen. There was no resolution. No clear conclusion. Just a moment that changed everything. and the unanswered questions that followed. Romeca's takeaway was simple but powerful. Sometimes, the most revealing part of a story isn't the event itself. It's how people respond to it. And when one response is silence, it can echo louder than anything else. Backhand index pointing right if you want more stories that make you think. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.